I actually started my kind of work world as a drama teacher, and I directed self-revelatory performances for teenagers. So they would come up on stage and share personal stories. And I noticed that there was a lot of trauma in those stories. And so sometimes they would tell me that they went home after, working on their monologues and they might drink or they might self-harm. And so I really wanted to understand trauma and how do you hold a safe container for people to share their stories without getting overwhelmed by their own stories and re-traumatized or re-triggered by their stories. So I went back to school to get my degree in psychology and actually found a program called the Drama Therapy Program in San Francisco. And so I was able to blend two things that I love, supporting and helping people on an emotional level, but also stage and sharing our stories and presence and all of those things. So I taught for many years and went back to school, became a therapist, and used a lot of drama with teens and kids and then just got caught up in therapy world in general. And I've been a therapist for about 15 years. And 3.5 years ago, I decided to open up my own private practice. And it was fascinating to see kind of who filtered into my practice. And I noticed that there was this pattern. I do have men in my practice, but mostly it was women who tended to be on the gifted and talented end of the spectrum, who were very emotionally sensitive, kind of these these powerhouse women who weren't accessing their own power. And so you could see that they were really smart and they had a lot of skills, but they weren't really able to access them. And they were often in unhealthy relationships because they didn't know how to communicate. And they often had a trauma history that was interfering with their functioning and interfering with their ability to kind of perceive what was happening in an accurate way. They were perceiving it through their trauma lens. And so once I opened my private practice, I pretty quickly knew that while I love doing one-on-one work, I would love to be able to reach more people and really, expand what I do. And because I taught drama for so long, I thought, well, maybe I'll do that from stages. Maybe I'll do that through motivational speaking and I'll, share my own story and things like that. So I started doing that in networking groups and started doing trauma-informed transformational coaching with business owners to help them be able to show up on stage in a powerful way, which is hard to do when you're still carrying trauma in your body. And so I noticed that a lot of women were very brilliant and had a lot of great things that they did, but they didn't know how to talk about it in a way that was engaging and compelling. When they delivered speeches, it was really flat. You didn't get a sense of their personality. It was almost like all of their personality kind of drained out of their body the second they got up on stage because it's scary. Being up on stage is a scary thing. So then I started thinking, well, shoot, maybe I can go deeper into that, more like speaker training or speaker coaching. And so then that continued to expand to, this is really about stepping into our feminine leadership. This is about women taking kind of all of those terms that have been thrown at them over the years that tell them that they are, they can't be leaders or they can't be, in their bodies, that they have to hide their sensuality, that they have to deliver their message in a certain way in this kind of masculine paradigm. And how do we break that? How do we get back into our own feminine nature and have that be valued and respected in the business world? Because it is a balancing force. The feminine is a balancing force to what has been the masculine paradigm in business. And you see, some of the biggest companies like Google and other places where, they have learned to adopt some of those feminine qualities, like take longer breaks and rest and rejuvenate so that you're more productive, right? Have a shorter work day, be able to do more collaboration and communication with each other and talk about things that are emotional in nature, because we need to be able to get those things on the table and out in the air so that we can then let them go and then refocus on our purpose together. So it's become just this bigger conversation, I guess, whether it's conversation individually with a client or out in the world around how do we stand firm in our feminine nature? How do we stay in our bodies despite trauma history? How do we show up as fully and authentically as we can and still be able to make change, make an impact in the world? So my business is called Women of Impact and Influence. And I have kind of one foot in both worlds, right? I have a therapy practice, and then I have this other kind of amalgam of different coaching, pieces. And like you were talking about earlier, I'm still figuring it out. I'm still figuring out, like, what do I want to be when I grow up? What is it that I'm doing over here with all of this information that I have? And yeah.
I think that's an interesting point to make is that we oftentimes trick ourselves into thinking that we're too old for something, where I think if it's very important to keep a young sense of self, just so that you can have that playfulness, because the creativity, in my opinion, comes from that playfulness, at least that I've found. And I know other people talk about this too, right? So, and I know this isn't really the subject matter, but it is such an interesting point to make that it's remarkable. And I mean, I don't think that I'm 37 years old. I don't feel like I'm 37 years old, but I mean, 37 isn't exactly like, I'm just saying I act younger than I actually am in certain ways, but that's good because it keeps you young. It keeps your mind open.
Yeah. Until I let my hair grays grow out during COVID, people thought I was much younger than I am.
Good luck. I used to, there was a time when I would see like leading men with their, George Clooney's like kind of golden kind of streaks, not golden, silver streaks. And I would think, you know what? I'd love to have hair like that. I would like to have actually like gray hair coming through my, and now that I'm finally getting gray hairs coming through, I'm like, I really don't want this anymore. First of all, it's not going to look as good as him. And then secondly, so, but yeah, there's a lot of things that you mentioned there that are worth discussing. I can understand from a male perspective how it must be terrifying in certain aspects for women to kind of adopt what are traditionally male roles, and how do they deal with that, and how do they prove themselves to an audience of maybe predominantly men, right, especially at the C level.
There's a picture that I remember was floating around on Facebook with like 3 little boys, and one was probably like 3, and one was about 8, and one was a teenager, and they're all looking over the fence of a baseball field. And what it shows is that the little one got a bigger box underneath him so that he could see the same thing as the teenager, and then the 8-year-old had a smaller box, right? So they all had what they needed to be able to see the field. And so what equality means to me is basically equal opportunity. That, and I agree with you that there are many facets of this, right? And, when you compare the looking for equality to also racism, it's a similar conversation, right? It's like, does everybody really have access to the same things? And if they don't, then can we look at those things? Like, do we have the emotional intelligence, since we're on that subject, right, to take ourselves out of the picture and really be able to look at all of those variables? And what I hear in the conversation sometimes is that people are bypassing those variables and saying, well, technically, you have the same options that I do. I mean, you could walk up and ask for a raise. You could walk up and do these things that I do. But the problem is that I'm doing that in a paradigm that doesn't fit me. And so how do we balance even the paradigm so that, the way I ask for a raise because of my kind of feminine training may be very different than the way a man asks for a raise. And by saying I should do
Yeah.
it like you do, you're telling me that I have to join your paradigm rather than you meeting me in mine or finding a
Hmm.
middle ground between the two. And
Hmm.
so that's what I see in the conversation is that, we kind of get up in arms about our own experience, right? And it makes sense psychologically. We want to believe we're good people. We want to believe we're doing the right thing. And so it can be uncomfortable. And that to me is emotional intelligence, is getting comfortable being really uncomfortable and being able to breathe with the discomfort that comes up when we have these deeper conversations. And someone believes that I have the same access that they do, and I have to stand my ground, and I have to stay in my body and be able to say, actually, that's not true. There is a paradigm here that is unfamiliar to me and uncomfortable to me because that's not how I operate in the world. And you're telling me the only option I have is to join you there. And I'm telling you, I would like you to take in my perspective and hang out my world for a little bit, and then we can
Mm.
talk, and then we can find that middle. So
Yes, yes,
that's
yes.
that image of like everybody getting what they need in order to have access to the same thing is to me what equality means.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I would stand behind that 100%, and I think that's definitely something that I think it's edging closer and closer. I don't work in a corporate environment. I haven't had a job for, I haven't been employed by someone else for like a couple of decades now. So it's something that I'm not subjected to that environment, but I know that it exists because the times that I have had clients who are corporate and have that structure and that culture. I mean, in varying degrees. Some are better than others. But there's a lot of progress to be made in areas of kind of equal opportunity. So I'm very glad that you kind of like you're helping to make that happen. And yes, emotional intelligence, the way that you describe it, being comfortable in uncomfortable situations. This is a topic that I don't think gets nearly enough airtime. I mean, it doesn't even get institutional time, right? I never learned what emotional intelligence. I didn't even know what EQ was until I became, a grown adult, and I was already kind of making, adult mistakes. So, what do you think is the importance of emotional intelligence? How much impact does that have on one's life?
Oh my goodness. EQ. So this actually, it's interesting because it feels like it's a parallel to the conversation we've been having. You have IQ, which is about, your ability to kind of perceive information, what you do with that information, how fast can you put the puzzle pieces together, all of those things. And that's one version of intelligence. And then you have emotional intelligence, which is the ability to, read people and be able to get what you want in a way that doesn't increase the defenses in the person in front of you. And how do you recognize what's actually happening in this interaction between two people? There's so many pieces to it. And so it's interesting. It's always been interesting to me because it feels like kind of like IQ is the masculine and EQ is like the feminine to some degree, right? It's like,
Yeah.
this is product oriented. This is, yeah. And the EQ is this, like the softer skills, really the softer skills of being able to communicate effectively and being able to get what you need or want effectively without force, right? With equality, the ability to bounce back and forth in conversation is a skill. And so it's fascinating to me. I used to work in schools, and I had this one teacher. She was, I think, a third grade teacher, and she sent a child to me for one of my groups. And I asked her what was going on, and basically she told me, you know what, I teach third grade, If they haven't learned social skills by now, I don't know what to do. Like they should have known social skills by this point. And it's all academics from here. And it just floored me. I was like, wait a second. There's a time when you stop learning social skills. Like
Yeah.
there's a time when there's an end cap to that. There's an end point. Like, I don't understand what you're telling me. So she basically was like really uncomfortable with children's emotions. How are you a teacher if you're uncomfortable with child's emotions?
You need the
Right?
money.
So that's, to me, is just one example of, your job can heavily depend on it, depending on what your job is. EQ is everything. It's such an important skill. And I think, we get these models a lot through movies too, these models of like these men or women who are just super domineering. They're really brilliant. So it's almost like they get away with treating people like shit, right?
Sure.
Because they're just so smart. And we've grown up with that as kind of a model of success, right? I just do my thing and everybody's got to fall in place around me and I don't have to have social skills. I don't have to be able to communicate effectively.
Right. Yeah, you can look at the Jeffrey Epstein case as an example of how someone who has chronic narcissism and psychopathic
Right.
traits can literally just get away
Right.
with things because they are charismatic. They do have
Yes.
money and power and influence.
Yes.
And
Yes.
if Jeffrey Epstein got away with all of that, just think about who else is getting away with
Right.
stuff. Isn't that terrifying? It's terrifying. I don't
Exactly.
sleep at night.
Exactly. Yes. You bring up such an important point because I think that what's happening in our world right now is people are really getting a clear sense of what narcissism actually looks like and feels like.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And because
The
of
80s are
that,
over. Yeah.
people are learning to defend them. Yeah, people are learning to defend themselves against narcissism. They're learning how to recognize it. They're learning how to set boundaries with it. They're learning how to say, that's not okay with me. And you don't get to treat me like that. And so the more that we learn those EQ skills, right, of also recognizing when we're getting trampled, when our own emotions are getting trampled, that changes the dynamic. It changes the dynamic. And then those men who have had power start to unravel because that power is now getting holes poked in it. And that can be dangerous for some people. And that's, to me, another fascinating aspect, right? As we get more emotionally intelligent as a society, as we start learning what these things actually are. And yes, people throw that word around in a way that's not accurate, right? That doesn't actually reflect what it means. So we have to be careful about our words as well, right? I can't just throw out the term narcissism. I don't know, someone's biopsychosocial history. I don't know if they actually meet the criteria.
Sure.
I have to be careful with what I say there.
It is easy to dish it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So the accuracy of our emotional intelligence is important as well. We get a lot of these new terms thrown around, and we want to know what we're talking about before we engage in conversations where we're
Sure.
labeling.
Sure, absolutely. It's one of the common recurring themes in a lot of the questions that we get asked as an organization, because people reach out to us and they want help with their relationships. So they ask us any number of questions about the broad spectrum of how to get along with their partner, how to figure out how to deal with loss or, dating. And a commonly recurring theme in the questions is how to deal with a relationship where, and whether it's mentioned as narcissism or not, where one of the partners is actually displaying narcissistic tendencies or sociopathic tendencies. Without the correct approach, I think those can be, disastrous. I think they are disastrous by nature, just because of the kind of the condition, if you will, depending on how serious it is. But, That was just to mirror your statement about how we're becoming a lot more aware of this now, whereas maybe before, and again, it was maybe not as strong in previous generations because there has been a huge kind of focus on the superficial and the external over the last few decades.
Mm,
So, you know, it
yeah,
kind of has
yeah.
spiraled into that kind of externalism and manipulation and power and wealth. But, um, but
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
it's a changing world. Some for the better, some for the worse. Paradoxically, at the same time, I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I think people are waking up, and I think to wake up, maybe
Hmm.
you just need to go to the other side, the other end of the spectrum. But when it
Right,
comes to
right.
emotional intelligence, yeah, right, yeah. It's sorry, there's a bit of delay on here, so it's like don't know when.
Yeah.
But you know, it's when it comes to emotional intelligence and the embodiment. Can we talk a little bit more just about how to actually get in a situation where you are able to handle being uncomfortable? Because I have been in relationships, or I
Mm,
know people as well that struggle with even the smallest discomfort. They run away
yes,
from
yes.
those, and I used to do it too. I really did, and I kind of got a
Hmm.
lot better at it
Hmm.
now. But you, as a kind of a therapist, how does one go about becoming? How do you call it? It's embodiment, correct?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So let me just start with kind of my definition of embodiment, and then we'll go backward from there. To me, embodiment, the simplest description is that I am right here, right now, aware of both my external and internal environment. I'm able to recognize how I feel. I'm able to recognize what I'm thinking, and just staying with that. So rather than letting my story take me off into the ethers, or and dissociating or checking out or numbing out, or becoming really reactive to whatever information has come into my field, I learn to just be with it. And that might mean I need to take a few breaths. That might mean I need to give myself a moment to take all of that information in, and let my system filter through to what is really important right now. What is it that I need to say? How do I want to respond? Or do I need to leave the situation?
Mm-hmm.
So, embodiment is really the bridge between the power of the mind and the wisdom of the body. And we live in a very heady world where we're all, a lot of us are kind of cut off at the neck. We think a lot, we think a lot, we think a lot, we analyze a
Yeah.
lot. But when it comes to how we feel, people are like, I don't know how I feel. Even just feeling language, like people don't even know how to name what they're actually experiencing. And
Yeah.
so embodiment is also learning how to just like factually describe what's happening in your own system. I'm noticing that
Mm.
I just got like a rush of kind of intense feelings running through my body right now. And so I just want to take a breath, kind of check in with what's going on before I answer your question. I noticed that I
Mm.
just, my face just got flushed. And so something's there for me. And I just need to take a moment with that. So you are so right. We are not taught how to tolerate distress. And what's interesting is that, again, our training kind of as people in male bodies or female bodies often is a part of that process. Boys are taught, don't feel your feelings. The only feeling you get to have is anger, right? And so that limits their capacity or their ability to recognize what they're experiencing. And then for women, they're told that they're overly emotional as soon as they have an emotion that isn't happy or pleasant or accommodating. And
Mm-hmm.
so we shut down also, or we kind of explode our emotions all over the place. So the other end of the spectrum from numbing out is exploding our emotions on the people around us, like not being able to tolerate it so much to the degree that we then have to discharge it onto other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So emotional intelligence in an embodied form is basically everything that I said: recognizing what's happening, slowing down, breathing, taking a moment to filter through the story that's in my head and maybe get down to the facts of it, right? So rather than, you like just now, right? You shifted your body and crossed your arms. So I can interpret that as like, oh, he just got bored, or he's closing down, or he's shutting himself off, right?
Right.
But I have to actually ask you if I'm curious about that. I have to say, what
Right.
just
Right.
happened? And your answer might be, I was uncomfortable and I wanted to get comfortable,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yes.
it. That's it.
Yeah,
But I can
absolutely.
interpret it and go off. Yeah. Go ahead.
You can think about it like this. You know that this happens. You know that you misinterpret people all the time. You've done it before. People have pointed it out
Right.
to you. But you do it more often than people point out to you. So think about how many times you're misinterpreting someone else's actions and actually allowing that to dictate or at least influence your own beliefs, your actions, and your outcome as well. You know,
Yeah.
I got an interesting little story where I went through a period where I was actually, I would think the US equivalent would be I was on welfare. So I got to a point where I was basically at the bottom financially, and I needed to get a job. I was contacting these recruitment agencies, and one day my then girlfriend told me she was going to call at a certain time. So the phone rang and I picked it up and I answered in an energy like, hey, how's it going? Because I was excited to talk to her. But it wasn't her, it was a recruitment agent, right? And the recruitment agent paused and then started speaking to me in an upbeat kind of energetic tone, like, I'm fine, how are you? It's good to talk to you. It's someone here from, read.co.uk or whatever. And I was kind of like taken aback, but I just went along with it, right? Because I didn't want to, I had to save face. And, I thought that was the most pleasant conversation I'd had with anyone in that entire process of looking for a job, because he genuinely took that, from me and ran with it. Now, I don't know if people are making the connection here. I don't even know if I am connecting it. But what I'm saying is, I think energy and perception and, they all make a huge impact on outcomes. So if
Yes.
you don't, if you know that you're getting things wrong with perception, then I think that whole practice that you mentioned of just stopping, taking note or taking stock of what's going on and then kind of like seeking clarification is really effective, and it's helped me a lot. I mean,
Yes.
sometimes it's hard to say,
Yeah.
sorry, can you repeat that? Or can you explain that a bit more? Because maybe you're in a situation where that person is intimidating. They might be your boss, or they could be someone that you don't want to upset.
Right.
But the alternative is you will never know. And so you've missed that. And it could affect you later. So yeah, I just wanted to hammer home the whole principle of just clarity, clarification, and getting things correct. And I think the many times that I've actually done that, and I've actually sought clarification when I felt like maybe I shouldn't, I think 99% of the time, it's never been a problem. In fact, it's always been incredibly
Right.
insightful and helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And the response is often like, oh, thanks so much for asking.
Yeah.
Right? Like people want to be clear. They don't want to be misunderstood. And so when we ask them to clarify or we check in, one of my favorites is I love Brene Brown's work and how she talks about just naming the fact that you're in a story. Right. And so I'll do that with my husband where we're talking about something or I'm interpreting something that he said or done. And I'll just say, so the story that I'm making up right now about this situation is this. And I know it's not accurate, but this is the story that's rattling around in my head. And
Got
he'll
it.
he'll
Yeah.
just stop for a second and be like, "Oh my honey, no, that's not what I was thinking at all, or that's not what I was, doing." And it's just such a relief to me to take that risk. And again, that's part of distress tolerance, right? Is taking the risk of being vulnerable in that moment and saying, something that you said tripped me up, and owning that and taking emotional responsibility that I am responsible for my own reactions and responses, and that I
Hmm.
have to stop and check in with myself, before responding to, another person. And my husband we've been together for 9 years, and he really has been pivotal in my own emotional intelligence when it comes to intimate relationships. We are just so good at experimenting with these ways of communicating with each other to be more effective and more loving in our
Wow.
conversations with each other. And he blows me away constantly, like when I hit a big fear. And we talked about touching on this, but I was in a destructive relationship for a good 20 years, from my teenage years all the way through until my late 30s. And it's kind of like my ex-partner and I did everything wrong. It's like we broke every rule when it comes to emotional intelligence and the ability to communicate effectively and all of the things that we've been talking about. And so having that contrast of being in a relationship where we take that time, that spaciousness, where we breathe in between our words, where we check in with each other, and it's just such a beautiful process. And I've learned
Hmm.
so much through him,
Hmm.
through being able to also not interpret his behaviors, because my tendency was to interpret his behaviors through the lens of that 20-year relationship. And that wasn't serving either of us. That was detrimental to our relationship for me to layer on top of the current experience, my old experience. So I had to learn how to sit in that discomfort and really pick it through and do that same process, right? Of like, take a moment and breathe and go separate myself and journal a little bit and kind of tease it apart. Like what's really happening here? And then regulate myself, go back and engage in conversation with him so that I could really understand what was happening. So that work of our own inner work is so deeply important. We've got to recognize those moments when we are tripping ourselves up by misinterpreting or by being so dysregulated that we can't actually engage in the conversation effectively.
Do you think that you were only ready for this journey of becoming more self-aware and more self-conscious after you'd experienced a lot of those years of, I would imagine, just not a very good relationship? I mean, feel free to fill in the gaps, but do you feel like for someone who is, I would think anyone who's listening to this is already on a journey. I mean, if they've listened this far, it
Yes.
stands to reason that they wouldn't
Yes.
just be stumbling upon this. So, how important is it for us to go through those experiences? Because, like we said before, I mean, we don't get taught this at school. I don't know if that would have changed anything. Like, if I had been taught about emotional intelligence, it probably would have changed something. But maybe there's something about the human condition that we have to experience these things before we actually realize what they actually are.
Yes, I love that question. So that is a core component of healing from trauma, is recognizing the gift in the traumatic experience. What is it that you now know or can hold that you would not have had the capacity to hold if you hadn't been through what you've been through? The whole concept of like the wounded healer, even, right? Like, how can I hold such deep space for others if I haven't been through some shit myself? Right. And I see people who try. I see people who try to hold deep space, but because they haven't done their own work, or because they haven't had certain experiences and had to really grapple, they are great at, they have great knowledge, but there's something about not just having the great knowledge, but being able to make that relatable. And the way we tend to make it relatable is through the filter of our own experience. And so being able to explain something where someone's like, oh gosh, she knows exactly what I'm talking about. Like, that's a beautiful thing to be able to do with another person, to be met in that way. Right. So I do believe that for most of us, maybe even all of us, our traumatic experiences really set us up for the work that we're here to do. In many ways, it changes us. It makes us more aware. It makes us good at grappling, good at being able to really notice what's happening in this interaction and slow things down. It's if we've done our work. So that's the caveat, is like, you can have a traumatic experience, and if you don't actively work with it and learn about it and process it and play with it, then you're still most likely either coming from that place of reactivity or coming from that place of being completely checked out and not being able to connect. And so you have to do the work. It's as simple as that. Like, you can't get away with not doing the work and be effective in using the information from your traumatic experiences in service to yourself and to others and to your relationships. So it's that by itself is kind of convoluted, but yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that it's like a plant. A plant grows for a long time under the soil. It grapples, it pushes, there's pressure, and then when it finally comes out, it's beautiful, right? And it continues to grow as it comes out of the earth. So if we look at that image of something being planted in the earth, that is our experience. And the plants that can't make it through that struggle don't survive.
No.
They don't survive.
Yeah, they
So
don't.
struggle is a natural part of the human experience.
It's a non-stop practice. It's routine. It's, I mean, you probably know how powerful routine is. It's something that I didn't understand fully until maybe a few years ago. I mean, I've had a nomadic lifestyle, which carries with it pros and cons. And the cons are that your routine can be very severely disrupted. And as a result, I didn't really have a routine for a long time. And now that I'm very fixed in the same place, I've said this many times, COVID was a huge deal for me. It opened up so many doors of personal growth that I think, were not something I could see without that external condition. So, there are environmental factors, I think, that can really help. And I'd even go as far as to say that, even though I don't believe in the prison system in its entirety, I think that time alone can very much heal people and help them see things that they couldn't see before. So, but routine, routine has been essential for me to regulate my emotions, to have a happier day, a more fulfilling day, a clearer day, removing substances from my, lifestyle. Alcohol has been massive. Right. I mean, it has to be. Yeah. It's very damaging. I think even if people are looking for help and then they don't take the advice, I think it's okay, because, when they're finally ready to actually do something with that advice is when they'll use it. I mean, you know,
Yes.
what more can you do? That's all the best you can do. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't be
Yeah.
so hard on yourself. I'm not talking to you specifically, but in general, I think people can be hard on themselves for not getting it, when in actual fact everyone's journey is so different. And I can empathize
So
with
true.
anyone who finds it hard to actually implement things. So, but in your
Yeah.
profession, with your clients, what kinds of work do you do with them to prepare them outside of, let's say, the embodiment that you talked about earlier? How do you help people to get to the goals that they've set for themselves, for example?
Yeah. So it's funny because in my journey of becoming a coach, that was a question I kept running into is, like what am I really doing here? So I've always been somewhat of a coachy therapist in the sense that I'm
Ah,
very focused on like what is the goal here? Like where are we trying to get to? We can't just have this
right.
nebulous I want to feel better, right? We need something
Hmm.
measurable. We need something so that we can look back at this piece of paper and say, wow, something's really happened here. I don't feel this as often in these situations, right? Or I'm practicing this skill this many more times per week than I was before, or you know, whatever. What are the tangibles? What are those things that show up in my life that are going to be different because I'm doing this work on myself? So, but the other piece was that, my focus has always been on trauma. Like that's my gift. That's where I feel comfortable, where I feel my zone of genius is in recognizing that trauma has entered the room in this conversation. And what are we going to do with that information?
Hmm.
Right? Because the trauma is going to consistently interfere with the ability to reach that goal because it's a default response and reaction. So the way that I work with folks is often we do that work first, kind of like identifying what's getting in the way here and knowing what that is so that we can get in there and really work with that part of ourselves that's still holding on to that trauma story and is creating those trauma reactions, so we can recognize it when it's happening in the moment, have some tools to be able to say, not right now. I hear you. I get it. We're scared. This is something you want to come protect me from, but I gotta do this. I've got your back. We're good. Go relax. Right. So, and there's lots of different tools that we use to do that. I do a lot of parts work because of my drama background, the part of you that feels this way, the part of you that wants this thing, the part of you that's coming into this current experience that's afraid of what might happen. And so we identify those parts, but we also learn to communicate with those parts. And sometimes those parts just need us to recognize them and to acknowledge their role in trying to protect us, and helping them see that we have done the work, we're good to go, and they can relax now. Right.
Mm.
And so there's a lot of different ways that we play with that information. I've been trained in so many different things. It's hilarious. Like I'm this lifelong learner. I will always have something new in my back pocket. I was a clinical hypnotherapist for many years. I do EFT
Wow.
matrix re-imprinting, which is like a regression form of tapping. I do brain spotting, where you find literally the where the trauma capsule lives in your visual cortex, and be able to start to unravel that energy that's associated with that traumatic experience, so that people feel a greater sense of freedom and they don't feel like these parts of them come in and kind of like knock them out of the way. Like whenever you've had that experience where you stop after you've said or done something and you're like, that's not me. I don't know why I
Mm.
said that. I don't know why I did that. That is a
Right.
part that has literally come in and kind of pushed you out of the way because it feels threatened or scared or wants to protect you. And so how do we recognize that process, and build those tools again to breathe, to notice it, to go, whew, I just got activated, right? Something's happening in my system. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to assume it's one of my parts. I'm going to just, give myself a little mantra or something to say, like, everything's okay. I'm fine right now. And then continue on my journey, right? So depending on the person and their level of trauma, we work with that piece, because then once those parts have been satiated or satisfied or integrated or whatever words you want to use, now the road is clear ahead of us, right? We've dismantled some of those limiting beliefs, those core, negative beliefs like I'm not good enough, or, it's not safe, or whatever that might be. We've really broken those down because we've actually accessed the parts that are creating those beliefs, right? That created those beliefs in the first place. And then we're able to take a look at and feel safe with the potential success that's in front of us. Because that by itself can be terrifying for people, right? Like, who am I without all of this trauma? Who am I without all of these reactions and responses? Well, you still
Yeah.
have the trauma. It's still there. You're just not emotionally activated by it anymore, right? It's still a part of your experience. We don't erase it, that's not the goal. Just like you said, we wouldn't have grown to the place that we are now if we hadn't experienced that. So we need to honor our trauma, right? We're not trying to get rid of it. We're trying to integrate it and make it useful in our lives, right? And so when we can see it for that gift and make it useful, then the road opens up for us to be able to really step into all of our other strengths, right? All of our other parts, the parts of us that are courageous, the parts of us that are bold, that, are creative and playful, and all of those things. Those parts are often shadowed by the trauma. And so that's the goal, right? Is to bring our full self to the surface rather than only be acting from kind of those scared parts. So there's
When
a lot
you
of different ways we do that, but yeah.
when you learned all of this, did you use it on yourself, or had you already kind of
Yes.
done that through the process of learning it?
No. So when I believe I was your age, I was 37 years old. A friend of mine invited me into a women's circle, and I'd always been, that's a whole nother story. We won't go there, but I've always been like terrified by women. Like, I was very disconnected from the feminine. Just, yeah, that's its own story. And, but it was a 12-hour once a month group. So there was no escape. Like, when you stepped in that door, you were going
12
deep.
hours?
You were 12 hours. And so we just unraveled throughout each 12-hour journey, right? Like, really got in there, really got deep. A lot of witnessing and reflecting, right? Like, having people see you so differently than you see yourself. So it was a great confrontation for me to have these women reflect these things to me that were actually more like my light shadow, right? So these positive aspects of myself that I wasn't connected to and I didn't know existed. And so that's the other side of the work, right? Is like being able to work on those parts that we've shut down ourselves, that are positive about us, that are illuminating, brilliant, incredible about us, and letting those parts come forth, right? So that was actually, I'd been in therapy and done, I was a self-help junkie. I had probably every book on my shelf that, was possible when it came to doing that self-work. But that journey with those women took it so much deeper. And that's why I'm also fascinated with groups. Like, I really, really deeply believe in the group process, the witnessing, the holding, the reflection, like 10 therapy sessions in one, or 10 coaching sessions in one when you do a group, because there's just so much richness there. So I did have to do a lot of my own work. And what's fascinating when that is a value of yours, because I know people who do healing work and they don't do the work themselves. That's a value that's not being expressed, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
So yeah. And what's cool about being, having to do CEUs and things like that is, like, you're always learning a new thing, and you have to, whenever you're learning it experientially, you have to be both the therapist and the client. Like, you switch places, so you're doing your own work on a pretty consistent basis when you're doing CEUs, as as long as that's what you're doing, right? You're searching for new tools or, whatever. So, yeah, I do a lot of my own work. And I would say that the skills that have helped me the most, other than, the specific like deep dives, has been DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which is there's 4 components: mindfulness, emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. Pretty much everything we've been talking about. And they are a set of skills that help us do that practice of being mindful of our experience, noticing that we're emotionally dysregulated, using tools to bring ourselves back into our bodies, back into the current experience, being able to articulate that to others in a way that doesn't cause more problems, right? It's everything that we've been talking about. And when you learn DBT, if you teach it, you have to actually use it, because you're supposed to come in with your own examples of how you use those tools. Right. So it was great. It's like I would literally finish teaching a particular skill and then have something show up in my life where I got an opportunity to use that skill. And it was like gold, right? Like, oh my God, I just did that. And I write it down as a story for my next group, So I'm active in my own healing as often as possible. Do I have my blind spots? You bet. Do I have those parts of my life where I'm like, oh God, I don't want to touch that one with a 10-foot pole, but I also know the value of going there. And so I will often call somebody up or do a practice session with somebody and say, I got to get there. I got to work on this one. I can feel it needs to move so that I can access my next level of, brilliance or greatness or whatever, term we want to use, my next level of evolution.
Yes. So much value in the personal journey when it is initiated by yourself in the face of almost certain discomfort. I mean, to make it simpler, do things that are hard. I don't know if you know who Wim Hof is. He's the Iceman. He is a Guinness World Record multiple times setter. He has ice baths. He gets walks up, hikes up Everest, in just shorts. Yeah. And beyond that topic, which is a whole topic of its own, cold therapy and breathing. Right. It's not easy to do that because it feels terrible at the beginning. I mean, but for me, just doing something hard every day, like a cold shower. Okay, I live in a cold country right now, so having a cold shower is cold. It's not a Southeast Asian shower, which is pretty warm.
Right.
This is a cold one. So if I do that every morning, I kind of program myself that I've already done something very difficult. So everything else is going to be a lot easier, or at least it's not going to be as hard. And it's building that momentum of personal power. I didn't have that throughout most of my life because I didn't understand the value of doing things that were difficult just because, just keeping something going in the background. I've had a very comfortable life. And I'm very fortunate because of that. However, I think it's a double-edged sword. I think that if you allow convenience to creep in and comfort, and your entire life is just in a ball or a bubble rather of that comfort and convenience, you lose your own self-respect and things like anxiety or depression or like a lack of purpose can creep in, and they can mess with your emotions so much. It's a kind of emotional intelligence. It's a recognition that you have to go through discomfort and grow in order to reveal more of yourself. And that's where Absolutely. I think, because you say you learned so much, that's it. That's what's happening. You're driving yourself to grow so that you can feel joy and fulfillment with yourself and life in general. So I went on a rant there, but basically, My experience that I wanted to bring to the table was that, yeah, you know, I'm always thinking about the person listening and what they're getting from this conversation. So, you
Mm-hmm.
know, it's one thing to use a therapy from, let's say, you know, seek help externally, but it's another thing to just do something hard every day, and it doesn't have to be a cold shower.
Yeah.
You know, it could be just. I mean, as Jim Rohn used to say, swallowing the biggest frog in the morning, which is like, what do you need to do? What's your goals? What's the hardest thing? Oh, let's do that first, because if we do that, then you know you build up momentum. And I think that helps with, you know, breaking free of your
Yeah.
situations that you maybe, you know, are kind of holding you
Yeah.
back in life. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's such a great perspective. You know, because yes, when you have had a comfortable life, that is an important skill, right? How do you handle discomfort? How do you handle when someone doesn't want to give you what you want? How do you handle, you know, just the discomfort of life? I think that's so important. And on the other end of the spectrum, what I've seen with trauma at times is almost this resistance to the hard stuff because I've already been through so much hard stuff. And so it's turning that around and recognizing that that was hard stuff that you couldn't control. That was different than choosing to do something that is hard, just like you said, to calibrate my system, to remind my system that it's possible, to start feeling accomplished right off the bat at the beginning of my day
Oh yeah.
is
Yeah.
very, very different than someone doing something to you, right? Or some unforeseen catastrophe that happened that interrupted your life, right? Like this is about reclaiming choice. And if I
Mm-hmm.
reclaim choice by purposely putting myself in a position to feel challenged in the morning, what a beautiful thing. You know, I'm deciding to do that. I am empowering myself to make that decision and to start my day feeling good about myself. And
Mm-hmm.
that is
Mm-hmm.
a hard one sometimes for trauma victims to wrap their heads around because again, they feel like, well, I've already, you know, my whole life has been hard. Well, but that's a different thing. You know, that's,
Right. It's
so
kind of
I just
like
wanted
what
to touch on
marketers have
that
learned,
piece.
that they, you know, over the time that we've been selling things, they've gotten cleverer and cleverer. I'm a marketer by trade, and you know,
Hmm.
there aren't any more advertisements that say buy this, unless it's a very cheap item, and you know, people know that they need it. It's a commodity. If it's something like Apple,
Right.
they they're almost performing inception on you so that you feel like you're the one making the choice. You feel like you're the one
Yes.
choosing Apple rather than then telling you to buy them. And
Hmm.
it's the same kind of principle. If you're the one who decides this is good for me, then you're going to think it's good for you. And I think that
Right.
is the key. It's like oh, taking responsibility for your own personal growth.
Hmm.
But you know, I had
Hmm.
this thought while we were talking. I was like, hang on a second. How did you last 20 years in that relationship?
Oh my goodness. I didn't. I checked out. I checked out. I
Right.
disappeared. I got into just doing what I needed to do to get by. You know, I wasn't present. I wasn't there. And so, you know,
You mean
that's again, you
emotionally
know,
and
trauma
mentally,
response.
not necessarily physically, right?
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that, and that, you know, was part of the driving force for me to change my life after that happened
Yeah.
was realizing that I had completely disappeared
Hmm.
and I didn't really remember who I was and I needed to get back there and rediscover and simple things like looking around my house and saying, you know, like I don't like anything that I'm looking at. Like why did I even put that on the wall? I don't like it. Why did I do that? So it was for a good 3 years, I went deep because I needed to. I needed to rediscover who I was. I needed to reclaim aspects of myself that I had allowed to be shut down, or that I shut down myself out of a sense of safety and protection. And there were always glimmers of light. So, we have these stories that we hear about, people in their darkness and how they came out, and it sounds so simple and so beautiful. But the reality is that, we even within our trauma, we had moments of joy. We had moments of connection. We had moments where we forgot, those things about
Yeah.
ourselves. And, so we have to kind of recapture those things. Like, our brain is designed to focus on the things that are a threat. But the reality is, like, in order to deprogram some of those things, we have to hyper focus on the things that are good. We have to hyper focus on those moments where beauty was happening. And so
Right.
we have to get out of that all or nothing thinking, and again, get into that messy, uncomfortable middle ground, which is, yes, I experienced this trauma or darkness or whatever it was, destruction, and I experienced good things too. And I get to claim
Mhm.
both. I'm not any less, I have a son, he's 16, and we've been joking about doing a podcast together. And we were talking because we have these really rich conversations,
Okay.
especially around subjects like this, right? And I said, well, what would we name
Wow.
it? Like, is this conversations between mother and son, or like what we do? He's like, no, we just need to call it Stop Being a Victim. I was like, wait a second, what do you
Wow.
mean? And he said, because that's really what we're talking about, is like taking yourself out of the victim role, even if you've been victimized, and putting yourself back in an empowered place. And
Mhm.
this is a 16-year-old, like, this kid blows my mind. And so we've
That
been
is interesting.
talking
Yeah.
about, right, having these conversations around how do we recognize when we're actually doing that to ourselves, when we're placing ourselves in the role of the victim, or we may be allowing someone else to put us in that role. And how do we take our power back? Because when you look at the victim savior perpetrator triangle, it doesn't exist without the victim. It just
Mm.
doesn't. And so if I
Yeah.
put people in the role of savior in my life, or I put the people in the role of perpetrator in my life, I'm allowing myself to be the victim. And if I take victimhood out of the story, then it changes the way I interact with those different roles. No, you don't need to save
Mhm.
me. Thank you very much. I can do it myself, or I've
Mhm.
got the skills. Thank you. Or, yeah, I'm not going to let you treat me that way. I'm stepping away from this conversation or this relationship because that's what's in my best interest and what's empowering.
I feel like people, certain types of people, or maybe just a certain moment in that process of being a victim, to the transition to being in charge, is is too good to change because it fulfills your needs at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Being a victim is almost like a benefit in a certain mind perspective,
Mm-hmm.
certain frame of mind,
Mm-hmm.
and I think one of my goals, and I love that you brought up victim, being a victim, victimization. It's something I don't actually talk about a lot, which I will on Unleash Love, but I think helping people see that being a victim isn't going to take anything away from them. If like that's how you label it, it's not. It doesn't mean that they're less of a
Right.
person. It just means it's a certain time
Yeah.
of their life, a certain perspective and paradigm
Yeah.
that they have that's actually disempowering them, because no one wants to be called a victim. No one wants to entertain the idea that they are, let's say, I don't know, emotionally incapacitated, unable to take control, weak. Perhaps is
Mm-hmm.
another
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sentiment of victim mentality.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that it's a challenge that's worth fighting to help someone
Yeah.
turn it around in their head and say, actually, maybe I am a victim, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because now I know that I'm not helping myself. It's difficult. How do you get, it's a sensitive subject. You probably wouldn't say it that way.
It is.
But I think, right. But I think in the most extreme cases, we have different methods, right? I mean, in the most extreme cases, you're talking about having a, what do you call it, when people get together and they kind of ambush you, so that you're unable to get away, and they basically tell you the truth
Right.
about everything. I mean, that's an extreme situation, but
like an intervention.
an intervention, exactly. That's the word I was looking for. And I've never done an intervention. I've always wanted to do an intervention. I always want to know what happens when you do an intervention. I would hate the feeling of walking in on my entire family and my
Right?
friends.
Oh God,
They're
yeah.
just like, you're an asshole.
Ambush. It's interesting. So I want to step back for a second, because we're bringing up so many pieces that are great, because this is the dialogue, this is the grappling, this is playing with dark subjects, right? Difficult subjects.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I love about DBT is that there is this real hyper focus on stick with the facts and take away judgments, assumptions, and interpretations, and stay away from those value judgments, right? So when we use a word like victim, that by itself has a whole set of connotations. It's a word, a label, right? That has a lot of different things attached to it. Mm-hmm. And when we take the label away, when we take the assumptions, interpretations, and judgments that are associated with that word, and we get down beneath the surface and we validate a person's experience, that's a very different thing. So if let's say you had something, awful happen with you, or I'll just use my own experience in that destructive relationship, right? I can notice, like you said, that I was in a victim place, a victim role, or that I played a victim role, or whatever those things are. And I can set that label aside and ask that my experience is validated, right? Because that's really what people want. So when you were talking earlier about when we can get stuck in that victim mentality, what's usually happening is that we are looking for some semblance of validation of our experience. Yeah, it was a shitty experience. Yes, it was awful. Yes, you got hurt. Yes, these things happened, right? And we're seeking that. The problem for most folks is that, especially when there's some really deep betrayal, we're searching for this perfect validation. So we keep telling our story over and over and over again to different people, expecting to get this perfect validating statement, this perfect reflection of our experience. And we will never, ever find it, because the only person who can give that to us is us.
Yeah.
We are the only person who was there. We're the only person who actually went through all of that and knows the nuances to the degree that we need validation for, right? And so that work of learning how to turn toward ourselves and be our own best validator, our own best friend, our own confidant, is part of the healing process, right? To be able to turn that lens back to ourselves and give ourselves what we need and stop searching for that outside of ourselves. Yeah, we're social creatures. We do need that from the people that we love, right? We do want to be validated. That's important. We want that, but it can't be the only thing, right? We've got to also be able to validate ourselves and our own experience.
And so that's why I think
to name that, right?
Times like this are like opportunities you don't want to miss. It's almost like an investor missing the Bitcoin bull rush. It's like you have to pay attention to, okay, now I can't travel. Now I can't see my friends. Am I going to drink alcohol all day, or am I actually going to do something about this? Because now I've got a chance right now to do something about it.
Right.
Who knows how long this is
Right.
going to last for? We might be back, to normal in a few months. So
Yeah.
I really do want the best for everyone, and I really want to be a cheerleader
Yeah.
for people. And sometimes I feel like I just want to, like kick someone in the ass to like kind of like, but you can't do that. I don't, that's not what I'm going to do. But, I get the feeling, and so I have to translate that into something that someone can work with. And, and I don't
Right.
have the words.
Right.
Sometimes I don't have the right things to say, but it is so important. And it's a nice way to wrap up our conversation, is that thing that your son said. It's stop being a victim. I mean, in the nicest
Yeah.
possible way, right? You're a human being, and I'm a victim. I'm sure you're a victim sometimes. We're all victims, but do we
Yes.
let it stay with us or
Yes.
not? What are the things we do
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
break free, or are we going to let it consume us? So,
Yeah.
stop being a victim is like a fantastic way to close up on this. It's been absolutely brilliant to have you on the show. Thank you. Very, very good conversation we had. How do people
Thank you.
find you
Thank you.
and contact you?
Yeah, so my website is michellemaree.com. It's Michelle with two L's and Maree with two E's. And you can find information about me there. You can also contact me through the website. I'm on Facebook. I have a group called the Self Care Sisterhood for Fempreneurs, which is just a
Mhm.
place to remind ourselves that, we have to fill our own bucket. Like we can't be leaders if we aren't resourced. And so it's a really important subject for me. You can find me on Clubhouse at Michelle Maree, again with two E's and two L's for Michelle. And let's see where else. Oh, and on Instagram, I'm Women of Impact and Influence. That's my business. And so you can reach out to me there. So there's a lot of different ways that you can find me out there. And the Michelle Maree is basically my coaching kind of name, it's my middle name. And one of the things we're taught very early on as therapists is to separate your therapy practice from your coaching practice. And so while my coaching practice is informed by my therapy background, I'm not doing therapy when I'm doing coaching. And so that's why I've decided to separate it even with my name.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll put
Yeah.
all that in the description. Thank you so much again for coming on. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.